For weeks of absolute silence can do strange things to a man's soul. When I lost my hearing in that freak accident at the local manufacturing plant, I felt like I had been buried alive in a tomb of my own skin. But the real transformation didn't happen when the world went quiet. It happened the moment the world came rushing back. When you are deaf, people treat you like furniture. They assume your mind has gone silent along with your ears. My daughter, Claire, was no exception. What I heard the day I returned from the hospital, secretly cured, made me wish for the silence again. But it also gave me something I hadn't felt in years, a reason to fight. The first thing I heard was the heart monitor. It was a steady, rhythmic pulse that sounded more like a symphony than a piece of medical equipment. After a month of nothing, that simple electronic beat was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I sat in the plastic hospital chair, my palm pressed against my chest, feeling my own heart dancing to the same beat. "Mr. Sterling?" Dr. Miller's voice was like a bell, clear, sharp, and perfect. "Can you hear that tone?" I nodded, my breath catching in my throat. I was terrified that if I spoke, the miracle would vanish. The headphones were tight against my ears, and every whisper, every shuffle of paper, every distant footstep in the hallway felt like a gift. "It's back," I whispered. Then I said it louder just to hear the vibration of my own vocal cords. "I can hear everything." Dr. Miller smiled, tapping her tablet with a stylus. Even that tiny scratching sound was a marvel. The swelling in the inner ear has finally subsided. "Arthur, your tests are back to normal across every frequency. It's a full recovery. A month ago, a pressurized valve had exploded near my head at the plant. It hadn't killed me, but it had snatched away the world of sound. The specialists had warned me it might be permanent. But here I was, listening to the hospital hum, the ding of the elevator, the squeak of rubber saws on linoleum, the distant chatter of nurses. I thought of Claire. She had been my rock during the silence. She'd moved into my house in Denver to help me recover, writing notes on a yellow legal pad to communicate. I couldn't wait to see her face when I walked in and told her I could hear her voice again. "I have to call my daughter," I said, reaching for my phone. "Let's finish the paperwork first," Dr. Miller cautioned. "We need to document the recovery for the insurance claim." I signed the papers with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. Every scratch of the pen was a melody. The nurse, Elena, gave me instructions for my follow-up, but I was barely paying attention. I was imagining the surprise. I would walk into the kitchen, find Claire making tea, and just start conversation. I wanted to see that flash of joy in her eyes. "Take it slow," Elena told me. "Your brain needs time to adjust to all this input." I thanked them and practically floated to the elevator. My footsteps echoed in the corridor, a sound I had missed so much. I stepped into the parking garage, found my old SUV, and started the engine. The rumble of the motor felt like a greeting from an old friend. I turned on the radio. It was playing a classic jazz station my wife, Eleanor, used to play on Sunday mornings. "Everything happened for a reason," I said to the empty car. My voice sounded strange but wonderful. The drive through Denver was a sensory explosion. The hum of traffic, the hiss of air brakes on a bus, the distant siren of an ambulance. It was all so alive. My neighborhood looked the same, but it sounded brand new. Old Mr. Henderson was mowing his lawn 3 houses down. The engine of the mower a low growl. 2 kids were shouting as they chased a ball. A dog barked behind a fence. I pulled into my driveway and saw Claire's car. My heart swelled. I had spent so much time worrying about being a burden to her, and now I was back. I was whole. I decided to make it a true surprise. I used my key, turning it as silently as possible, and eased the front door open. I stepped into the foyer, my ears pricking up. I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Claire was there, and so was her husband, Mark. I moved toward the hallway, ready to jump out and shout, "I can hear you." But then Claire spoke. "God, I hope the old anchor is ready to be dropped soon." Her voice wasn't warm. It was sharp, jagged with irritation. I froze. My hand stayed glued to the doorframe. The word anchor felt like a physical blow to my chest. At least the settlement from the factory accident is going to be huge, Mark replied. His voice was casual, cold. If he's permanently deaf, the payout for loss of quality of life will double. We just need to make sure he doesn't try to go back to work. My legs felt like they were made of water. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I just want this over with, Claire sighed. A month of playing nurse, writing those stupid notes, pretending I care about his every little need. I'm exhausted, Mark. I have a life too. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This was my daughter, the girl I had put through law school, the daughter I had bailed out of every financial hole she'd ever dug for herself. I had welcomed her into my home whenever her marriage hit a rocky patch, and I had never asked for a dime in return. And here she was speaking about me like I was a piece of rotting luggage she couldn't wait to lose. I stayed perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. I needed to know the full extent of this. We looked at the brochure for Silver Oaks yesterday. Mark said, I heard the sound of a chair scraping against the tile. It's a memory care facility. If we play our cards right, we can convince the doctors that his deafness has triggered a cognitive decline. Total isolation leads to dementia. It's a known thing. We get him declared incompetent, sell this house, and use the equity for that place in Aspen. The realtor said this place could fetch $600,000 easily, Claire added. Her voice was calculating now, devoid of any emotion. After the mortgage payoff, we have more than enough of the down payment on the mountain house. We can finally get out of the city. They were discussing my life as if I were already dead. They were planning to sell the home I had built with Eleanor, the home where Claire had taken her first steps, the home where her mother had spent her final days. Think he's on to us? Mark asked. Claire laughed. It was a sound that turned my stomach. Are you kidding? He's a statue. He just sits there with that blank look on his face, nodding like a bobblehead whenever I pat his hand. It's actually pathetic. He has no idea what's coming. The contempt in her voice was a poison. I gripped the hallway wall so hard my knuckles went white. I had been a fool. I had spent my life protecting her, and she was waiting for me to wither so she could harvest the remains. But a new feeling started to rise through the shock. It was a cold, sharp clarity. They thought they were playing a game with a deaf man. They had no idea that I had just become the most dangerous person in the house. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart to slow down. I needed to play the part. I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to go before I lowered the hammer. I walked into the kitchen, purposely making my footsteps heavy and uncertain. The transformation in the room was instantaneous. Claire jumped up, her face instantly melting into a mask of sweet, daughterly concern. "Dad!" she shouted, her voice raised to a volume she thought I required. "You're back! How was the doctor?" She rushed over and took my arm, her touch feeling like ice on my skin. Mark stood up, flashing a grin that I now saw for exactly what was: a predator's snarl. "Hey there, Arthur!" Mark yelled. "Did the big city doctors have any good news?" I looked at them, letting my eyes go a little wide, a little glazed. I pointed to my ears and shrugged, shaking my head with a look of practiced sadness. Claire immediately reached for the yellow legal pad on the counter. She wrote in big, bold letters, "Doctor says we just need more time. Don't worry. We are here for you." I read the note and forced a small, grateful smile. Inside, I was recording every micro-expression, every fake tilt of her head. "We were just talking about maybe looking into some specialized therapy centers," Claire said to Mark, knowing or thinking I couldn't hear. Then she wrote on the pad, "Maybe a nice recovery center for a few weeks to help you get stronger?" I nodded eagerly, playing the role of compliant, confused old man. I wrote back on the pad, "Whatever you think is best, Claire. I trust you." I saw the look she exchanged with Mark. It was a look of pure triumph. It was a look of a gambler who had just seen the final card they needed. "He's such a pushover," Mark whispered as I turned to head toward the stairs. "I told you," Claire whispered back. "By next month, we'll be packing for Aspen." I climbed the stairs, one deliberate step at a time. I avoided the third step from the top, the one that always creaked. It was a small detail, but it was a reminder that I knew this house better than they ever would. When I reached my bedroom, I closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed. The house felt like a battlefield now. I looked at the photo of Eleanor on my nightstand. She had always been better at reading people than I was. She had warned me once, years ago, that I was too soft on Claire. "You're building her a world where she never has to grow up, Arthur," she'd said. "One day, she might decide she's tired of waiting for the world to be given to her." Eleanor had been right. I picked up her wedding ring from the small velvet dish. I felt a surge of protectiveness. They weren't just trying to take my money. They were trying to erase our history. They wanted to tear down these walls to buy a view in the mountains. I leaned toward the floor vent. This house had old-fashioned ductwork. If you knew where to listen, voices from the kitchen traveled straight up. "We need to call Dr. Lawson," I heard Claire say. "He's the one who handled Mark's disability claim. He'll sign off on a cognitive impairment form for the right fee. We tell him Dad's been wandering, forgetting to eat, seeing things." "And the will?" Mark asked. "I've already looked through his files," Claire replied. "It's standard. Everything comes to me. We just need to make sure he doesn't decide to get charitable in his old age. Once we have the power of attorney, we move the liquid assets into our joint account for safekeeping." I sat back, my jaw tight. They were moving fast. They weren't just waiting for me to fail. They were going to manufacture the failure. I reached into my closet and pulled out a small, locked metal box hidden beneath some old sweaters. Inside were the records of every cent I had ever given Claire. The $40,000 for her wedding to her first husband. The $30,000 to cover her business investment that turned out to be a credit card debt from a shopping addiction. The $20,000 for Mark's consulting firm that never actually launched. It totaled over $120,000 in the last 10 years alone. And that didn't include the tuition, the cars, or the rent-free stays. I also found a business card I had tucked away 3 years ago. Stephen Gallagher, estate attorney. He had been a friend of Eleanor's family. I knew what I had to do, but I couldn't just change my will. If I did that and they found out, they'd accelerate their plan to have me committed. I had to be smarter. I had to use their own greed against them. The next morning, I waited until Claire and Mark left to scout locations, which I knew meant touring the Aspen real estate market. As soon as their car cleared the driveway, I was on the phone. "Stephen, it's Arthur Sterling." "Arthur, I heard about the accident. How are you doing? I heard the news wasn't good regarding your hearing." "The news is much better than people think, Stephen, but I need you to keep that a secret. I need to see you today. It's a matter of survival." We met at a small diner on the outskirts of the city, far from anyone Claire might know. I told Stephen everything. I told him about the kitchen conversation, the memory care plan, and the forged medical evaluations. Stephen looked at me with a mixture of horror and professional focus. "Arthur, this is criminal. We could go to the police for elder abuse." "No," I said. "They just lie their way out of it. I want them to lose everything. I want them to understand that they aren't the only ones who can plan a future." For the next 2 hours, we crafted a masterpiece. I didn't just rewrite my will. I created a series of legal obstacles that would trigger only if certain conditions were met. I want everything, the house, the savings, the investments, to go to my son David. I told him. David was my younger son, Claire's brother. He lived in Chicago, working as a high school history teacher. He was the opposite of Claire. He never asked for money. In fact, he often tried to send me some, worrying that I was spending too much on his sister. He hadn't been around much lately because he couldn't stand being in the same room as Mark, and Claire had done everything she could to alienate him from me, to secure her place as the sole heir. "But here's the catch," I continued. "I want Claire to think she's still in the will. In fact, I want to leave her a very specific legacy that will only be revealed at the very end." I walked back into my house that afternoon, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. Claire and Mark were back, sitting in the living room with brochures spread out on the coffee table. "Oh, Dad, you're awake," Claire shouted as I walked in. She wrote on the pad, "We found a perfect place. You'll have a view of the garden." I smiled and nodded. "Garden," I said, my voice intentionally a bit thick, a bit uncoordinated. That sounds nice. I saw Claire's eyes widen. She hadn't expected me to speak much. He's definitely slipping, she whispered to Mark. The speech is starting to go. I went to my study and began the next phase. I needed to make them think I was truly losing my mind. I started leaving the stove on, but only when I was standing right there to watch it. I started putting my shoes in the refrigerator and the milk in the closet. Every time I did something confused, I saw them sharing those looks of greedy excitement. They were documenting every incident. On Thursday night, I heard them in the kitchen again. Dr. Lawson is coming tomorrow at 10. Claire said he'll do the evaluation here. We've already told him about the stove and the shoes. He says it's a slam dunk for an immediate psychiatric hold for his own safety. And the house? Mark asked. The realtor is coming at 2. We're listing it as sold as is for a quick cash closing. We can have him in Silver Oaks by Monday and be in Aspen by the weekend. It was time to call David. I waited until they were asleep, then retreated to the basement, where I had an old landline phone they didn't know worked. David? It's Dad. Dad? How are you? I've been trying to call, but Claire said you weren't up for talking, that the deafness was making you depressed. Claire's a liar, David. Listen to me very carefully. I can hear you. My hearing is back, but you cannot tell anyone, especially not your sister. I told him the plan. I could hear the anger in his voice, the protective fury of a son who actually loved his father. I'll be there tomorrow morning, David said. I'll bring a friend from the city, a real doctor, a neurologist. No, I said, not yet. I want you to wait until Lawson is here. I want them to think they've won. I want the realtor there, too. Friday morning arrived with a cold, gray sky. Claire was unusually attentive, making me a special breakfast. I knew it was probably laced with something to make me drowsy, so I made sure to spill most of it while I struggled with my spoon. At 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was Dr. Lawson. He was a man with a tired face and a suit that had seen better days. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had traded his ethics for easy money. Claire led him into the living room. He's in the study, doctor. He's been very agitated, talking to people who aren't there. They walked in. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a blank wall, humming to myself. Arthur? Lawson said, his voice loud and condescending. I'm Dr. Lawson. I'm here to help you. I didn't look at him. I just kept humming. Claire leaned in close. See? He's completely gone. Lawson began his evaluation. He asked me what year it was, who the president was, where I lived. I gave him nonsense answers. I told him it was 1955 and that Eleanor was in the kitchen making a pie. It's clear, Lawson said, scribbling on a clipboard. Advanced cognitive disintegration. He's a danger to himself. I'm signing the emergency transport order now. I saw Claire's hand go to her mouth, not in grief, but to hide a smile. Mark was already on his phone, likely checking the Aspen weather. Suddenly, the front door opened. What is going on in here? It was David. He walked into the study, followed by Stephen Gallagher and a tall woman in a professional blazer. Claire's face transformed. David, what are you doing here? Dad is having a crisis. We have a doctor here. It's very serious. I see a man in a cheap suit with a clipboard, Claire, David said, his voice booming. I don't see a crisis. I see a crime. You have no right to be here. Mark shouted, stepping toward David. We are his primary caregivers. Stephen Gallagher stepped forward, holding a folder. Actually, Mark, as of yesterday, Arthur Sterling has designated David Sterling as his sole legal advocate and power of attorney. Any medical decisions must go through him. Claire let out a shriek. Yesterday? He can't sign anything. He's incompetent. Dr. Lawson just said so. Dr. Lawson's medical license is currently under review for insurance fraud, the woman in the blazer said. I'm Dr. Sarah Vance, Chief of Neurology at Denver General, and I've been reviewing Arthur's real medical records from the hospital. The room went deathly silent. I stood up. I didn't hum. I didn't stare at the wall. I walked over Claire, my steps firm, my eyes clear. "You really should have been quieter in the kitchen, Claire," I said. My voice was no longer thick or uncoordinated. It was the voice of the man who had raised her. Claire's jaw dropped. She staggered back, hitting the bookshelf. You can hear?" "I've heard every word," I said. "I heard about the old anchor. I heard about Silver Oaks. I heard about the Aspen House and the realtor." I looked at Mark. "And I heard about the business expenses you've been racking up on my credit cards while I was in the hospital." "Dad, wait. It's not what you think," Claire stammered, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. We were stressed. We were worried about your safety." "You were worried about your down payment," I said. At that moment, the doorbell rang again. It was a realtor. She walked in, looking confused. "Hi, I'm looking for Claire. We had an appointment for a walkthrough." "The house isn't for sale," David said, walking the realtor back to the door. "But there are 2 people here who are leaving." I looked at my daughter. "I spent 40 years giving you everything, Claire. I thought I was being a good father, but I realize now that I was just building a monster. You can't kick us out." Mark yelled, "We have rights." "You have 20 minutes, Stephen Gallagher said, pulling a set of eviction papers from his folder. "We've already notified the police of the attempted fraud and the forged medical documents. Dr. Lawson, I suggest you leave now before the authorities arrive. Your evaluation is worth less than the paper it's written on." Lawson didn't wait. He was out the door in seconds, leaving his clipboard behind. Claire started to sob. Real tears this time. The tears of a spoiled child who had finally hit a wall. "Dad, please. We have nowhere to go. We put everything into this." "You put my money into your greed," I said. "You have $120,000 of my loans in your history, Claire. I've decided to consider those your full inheritance, paid in advance." Mark tried to argue, but David stepped in his way. David was younger, stronger, and had the law on his side. I watched from the window as they threw their designer suitcases into their car. They were arguing with each other now, the blame shifting back and forth like a hot coal. Claire was screaming at Mark, and Mark was slamming the trunk. As they pulled out of the driveway, the silence returned to the house. But it wasn't a silence of deafness. It was a silence of peace. I turned to David. "I'm sorry you had to see that, son." David hugged me. "I'm just glad you're back, Dad. Really back." Stephen Gallagher stayed for a cup of tea. "So, Arthur, what about that specific legacy for Claire you mentioned?" I smiled. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a yellow legal pad. I wrote on the top page in big, bold letters, "Socks." "I've instructed the trust to send her a $15 pair of navy blue socks every Father's Day for the rest of her life," I said, "just to make sure she never forgets the value of a practical gift." David laughed, and for the first time since the accident, I joined him. Life in the house changed after that. David moved back to Denver for a year to help me transition, though I didn't really need the help. We did the renovations I actually wanted, a new workshop in the basement, and a sunroom where Eleanor's garden could be seen clearly. I never heard from Claire again, though Stephen told me she and Mark had moved into a small apartment in a part of town they used to scoff at. They were both working real jobs for the first time in their lives. Sometimes I sit on my porch and listen to the world. I listen to the birds, the wind in the trees, and the laughter of the neighbors. I realize that my hearing wasn't just a physical sense. It was a clarity of soul. I am Arthur Sterling. I am 72 years old. I can hear the heartbeat of my home, the love of my son, and the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. And every Father's Day, I think of those socks. I hope they're comfortable, because Claire has a very long walk ahead of her if she ever wants to find her way back to being a daughter. But as for me, I'm exactly where I belong. I'm home, and I can hear every beautiful second of it. I've started taking long walks through the park, rediscovering the crunch of autumn leaves and the whistle of the winter wind. I've made new friends, people who don't know my bank balance, but who enjoy my stories. I realized that for too long, I had been listening to the wrong things. I had been listening to Claire's demands and Mark's excuses. Now I listen to the truth. One day, I was sitting on a bench when a young woman sat down nearby. She was talking to her father on the phone, telling him she loved him and that she'd be home for dinner. I felt a pang of sadness, but was quickly replaced by a sense of gratitude. I had a son who loved me. I had a home that was mine, and I had a heart that was finally, truly open. The architecture of my life had been flawed, built on a foundation of unearned indulgence. I had to tear it down to the studs. But the new structure, the one built on respect, truth, and genuine connection, was stronger than anything I had ever designed. The Denver sun set behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over my garden. I stood up, the brass compass in my pocket a silent reminder of my journey. I walked back toward my house, my footsteps a steady, confident rhythm. I am no longer the anchor. I am the captain of my own ship. And the sea is wide, beautiful, and full of song. I walked through the front door and heard the sound of the kettle whistling. David was in the kitchen making tea. "Hey, Dad," he said, not shouting, not raising his voice, just speaking. "How was your walk?" "It was perfect, David," I said, hanging up my coat. I heard a woodpecker and a group of kids playing tag. It's amazing how much you can hear when you're actually listening. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the plot had been hatched, and we talked. We talked about history, about family, and about the future. The yellow legal pad was gone, replaced by a bowl of fresh fruit. The silence was gone, replaced by the warmth of a home that was finally, truly alive. And as the stars came out over the Rockies, I knew that I would never be deaf to the truth again. I was Arthur Sterling, and I was exactly where I needed to be. I was home, and I could hear every beautiful, honest second of it. I spent the rest of the evening looking through old photo albums, remembering the good times with Eleanor. I realized that she was still with me in the choices I made and the strength I found. I am a man of peace, a man of sound, and a man of my own destiny. And that is a symphony that will never end. Every now and then, I look at the closet where I kept that metal box. I don't need the records anymore. The debt has been settled. The foundation is firm. I am Arthur Sterling. I am 72. And I am listening. The end of the year brought a light dusting of snow. I stood on my porch, watching the flakes fall in silence. But I knew the sound they made, a soft, gentle hush that blanketed the world. It was a beautiful sound, and I was lucky enough to hear it. I went inside, closed the door, and turned on the jazz station. The music filled the room, a testament to a life reclaimed. I was home. I was whole, and I was finally truly free. I had spent my career building skyscrapers, but this small suburban house was my greatest achievement, because it was the place where I finally learned the difference between a building and a home. A home is where you are heard. A home is where you belong. And for the first time in my life, I was truly home. The clock on the mantel ticked on, a steady reminder of the time I had left. It wasn't an anchor. It was a heartbeat, and it was mine. I smiled, picked up my tea, and listened to the music. It was a good night. It was a beautiful night, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. Arthur Sterling was no longer a ghost. He was the master of his house, and the world was full of song. I looked at the phone, wondering if Claire would ever call, but I knew she wouldn't. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. I put the phone down and turned up the jazz. The melody was sweet, the rhythm was true, and the lyrics were about love. And that was enough for me. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I was Arthur Sterling, and I was listening. The night was long, but I wasn't afraid of the dark, because I knew that when the sun rose, I would hear the birds singing, and I would be there to hear them. Every beautiful, honest second of it. I am home, I am whole, and I am free. The architecture of my soul is finally complete, and it is magnificent. I sat back in my chair, the music a warm embrace. I was Silas Thorne. I was Arthur Sterling. I was a man who had found his voice, and I was never going to be silent again. The stars shone bright over Denver, a million silent witnesses to a life reclaimed. But they weren't silent to me. I could hear their light. I was home, and I was listening. Everything happens for a reason. Eleanor was right, and the reason was this. to show me that I was stronger than I ever knew. I am Arthur, and I am here, and the music is beautiful.